they're not taking the subway in any event, and they don't have to deal with
You don't normally see the criminal justice process.
There's some very, it's not just attenuating evidence. It's like the trial went. There's some very, it's not just attenuating evidence. It's like there's reasonable doubt is not just the way this was, if not clear self-defense, a clear necessity to prevent violent assault. There's good reason to believe Neely died not as a result of the chokehold, but as a result of a ketamine overdose, because it occurred later on. He was still breathing after the chokehold was released. A whole bunch of stuff that lends to not just reasonable doubt, but outright acquittal. The issue is that there seems to be some holdouts on that jury that they cannot come to a unanimous acquittal. First interruption for this vlog. This was recorded the day before there was actually an acquittal. So Daniel Penny update has been in fact acquitted on the lesser charge, but this analysis really deals with the court corruption, the judge doing everything he could to secure conviction on the lesser charge, which thankfully did not happen. Back to the analysis. Whether or not it has anything to do with the guy wearing two masks who's depicted in that court drawing, which I'll bring up when you talk, they can't come to a universal acquittal on the greater charge, which is second-degree manslaughter. I hope that's the right charge. The other one is criminally negligent homicide. And like shit got a little wonky on Friday, where it sounded like the judge was saying, "Don't tell them what is exactly happening with the greater charge, the higher charge. Just tell them it's dismissed and don't tell them it's an acquittal, and let them go back and deliberate on the lesser charge, which carries upwards of a 4-year maximum sentence." There was some confusion as to whether or not it was being concealed, that the judge was concealing or setting aside the fact that there was a hung jury on the greater charge, which could lead to a retrial on that hung jury charge, as opposed to what actually happened, which was an outright dismissal from the prosecution that was objected to by the defense, which means that you can't be retried for it. And so the judge wanted to hide that fact from the jury while sending them back to deliberate on the lesser charge. And a lot of people were rightly screaming scandal on the interwebs. And I mean, you tell me if this is, the judge said in his, according to the reporting from Intercity Press, "I'll take my chance with your theory, people's motion, and not explain to them the consequences, the legal consequences of the dismissal, which is tantamount to an acquittal." How dirty is it, Robert?
I mean, it's to a degree, it's commonplace. In other words, that the judges, sort of do whatever prosecutors want them to do far more often than not. And most people are just unaware of this because they don't normally see the criminal justice process unfurl or unfold in a public way, or not paying much attention to it because they have no reason to. And so consequently, they don't realize how common this kind of behavior is. Now, this particular instruction, choosing to go from an Allen instruction, which is controversial in its own accord, which many defense lawyers feel is a coercive instruction intended to force the holdout to quit holding out, is the assumption that most prosecutors and judges have when they give an Allen charge, is that the holdout is a defense holdout, not the other way around.
Let's take a brief pause from this vlog for a word from our sponsor. The holidays are here, which also means it's sick season. Sinus infections, strep throat, upper respiratory hacking. Everyone is traveling and passing it all around. But guess what? You don't have to deal with it all alone this year. Why? Because this little blue case is your mobile urgent care. It has ivermectin, Z-Pak, amoxicillin, and 6 other prescription medications at your fingertips. Thanks to the wellness company's medical emergency kit, you can tackle anything severe your body comes across without ruining your holiday plans and winding up in urgent care. The kit cuts through the red tape by allowing you to take control of your health versus being reactive and inconvenienced during precious family time. You don't need a gatekeeper because their medical board created a guidebook that outlines the treatments for UTIs, strep throat, bacterial infections, respiratory illnesses, and more. All it takes is filling out an online digital intake form, and your kit arrives in 1 to 2 weeks. Travel with peace of mind this holiday season. Order your kit today by heading over to twc.health/Viva. Use promo code Viva for $30 off and free shipping. twc.health/Viva. Promo code gets you $30 off and free shipping, available to USA residents only. And now back to the vlog. Could you explain? I know what it is that many people might not. Allen charge is basically go back and really try to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. It's what many defense lawyers, and I concur with them, see it as an attempt to intimidate the jury into not performing their job. If there's a juror that says, "Hey, look, I don't believe he's guilty," you shouldn't get barraged by the judge. Well, you need to go back and rethink that, because what message does that send? Because that's in essence what typically happens here. And so that's its own controversial component. I mean, this is a case that would not have been brought in 90% of the country.
Mhm.
It was only brought in New York because he's the wrong race. That the victim was black and he was white. If it was the other way around, because the other way around has happened in New York in with this prosecutor, and they have not prosecuted. So they're prosecuting him because he's the wrong race, as Jeremy Carl pointed out. It's also part of a broader pattern of wanting to eviscerate self-defense, to say that the only people who have the right of defense are the government, to give the state a monopoly on the use of force and deprive it of us, which is what the Second Amendment is supposed to be there for. The Second Amendment being broader than just the right to bear arms; it's the right to have your self-defense against others, including the government or anyone else, and not having to depend or rely exclusively on the government for that. So that's sort of the political backstory of what's happening in New York. So it was the right race to prosecute, the right undermining self-defense prosecution that they wanted. It's similar to the Rittenhouse case out of Wisconsin, where the was straightforward self-defense, wouldn't have been brought in many jurisdictions, was because of the particular politics of the prosecutor in that case. And here, the X factor was the jury, that you have a Manhattan jury pool, and having dealt with them, the Manhattan jury pool in past cases, including political cases, like the so-called Central Park Karen case of Amy Cooper and others. We did surveys on that. We tested that there's a lot of bad jurors. So the fact that you have a double masked guy is not, is probably. I mean, what's the likelihood that juror is a pro defense juror? Hard to imagine that, to be honest with you, because it sounds like an intimidated, a authoritarian personality who will do what the state tells him to do.
Oh, and not just that, someone who's so germ neurotic, they're not taking the subway in any event, and they don't have to deal
Yeah.
with any of that crap. Probably
Exactly.
working from home.
Correct. So it always came down to the jury, and could you get a reasonable jury? And there were two aspects of that. One was, could you get a reasonable jury in the sense of an acquittal, which is what I think a reasonable jury would do in most cases. But in Manhattan, it would be probably more, half a dozen of this, half a dozen of the other. You're probably looking as much to put people on the jury that will just not convict no matter what. But because you're probably going to get stuck with jurors who want to convict no matter what. And what the judge did was basically give an instruction: go back and give me a conviction, and and ignore the top count that you can't agree on. So that is an unusual phenomenon in New York. As the defense counsel pointed out, this encourages prosecutors to overcharge if they can just dismiss the charges come verdict time. That the reason the disincentive for prosecutors to overcharge is that if they can't get an agreement in New York on that top count, they don't go to the lower counts, is my understanding. And so that's why they took a gamble. The gamble backfired on them, and they were like, "Okay, let's pretend we never took this gamble." And the judge is like, "Yeah, I agree. We need to convict this kid no matter what." That's really what's going on. And the question is whether or not there's enough honest, honorable jurors to make sure he's not convicted of a crime he did not do.
So they go back to, or they're back in deliberations. They're not sequestered. From what I understand, some of them are following the media, so they're listening to the Black Lives Matter lady threaten their safety if they don't give them the conviction they want. And they come back tomorrow to adjudicate on the lesser charge, which was criminally negligent homicide, which is still a felony that carries a maximum sentence of 4 years.
Correct. So at least he doesn't face an extended time in prison, but it's ridiculous that he faces any time in prison.